What if I told you that a seemingly ordinary drive could turn into something straight out of a nightmare? No warning, no way to prepare for what was about to unfold. You think you're safe, just going about your day, but then something happens, something that you can't explain. It's hard to put into words, but what I experienced that night still haunts me, and honestly, I've never been the same since. This wasn't just fear, it was something far darker, something that made me question what was really out there watching. Do you believe in coincidences? Because after what happened, I'm not so sure I do anymore. And if you think you'd know how to handle it, I promise you, you've never been in a situation like this before. Let me take you back to the moment it all started. I still remember the exact second I knew I wasn't alone on that road. And that's when things got weird. It was December of 2015, and I was just a college student heading home for the semester break. It was supposed to be a simple drive. Just me, the open road, and a quiet night ahead of me. I was driving south through Kentucky on I-65, close to midnight. You know that part of a long drive when it feels like the whole world is asleep and you're the only person left awake. That's where I was. Not a single car in sight for miles, just the soft hum of my engine and the rhythmic passing of the road lines. I was about an hour away from my next stop when I noticed something odd, an 18-wheeler in my rearview mirror. It was the only other vehicle I had seen in what felt like forever. At first, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary, but when the truck got closer, something about it just didn't sit right with me. The truck wasn't just passing me, it was keeping pace, perfectly in sync with my car. That's when the driver flipped on a spotlight, shining directly into my car, right on me. I tried to brush it off as some mistake, but it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt intentional. I slowed down, hoping the truck would pass, but instead, it slowed down with me, matched my speed. That light, bright and almost invasive, stayed on me. I didn't dare look over. I kept telling myself that I was imagining things, that it was just a trucker messing around, but deep down, I knew better. That's when the truck swerved, moving into the lane directly in front of me, as if it was trying to block me in. I shifted to the far left lane, putting as much distance as I could between us, and for a second, I thought I was in the clear. But no, the trucker wasn't done. The truck moved again, right back beside me, matching my speed, like it was playing some twisted game. And then I saw it, a figure in the passenger seat. At first, I thought it might be another trucker, but then I realized something was off. The figure was still, too still, almost like it wasn't alive, like it wasn't even human. That's when the panic set in. My heart raced. I slammed on the gas, pushing my car faster than I'd ever driven. 90, 100 miles per hour. I had to get away. But no matter how fast I went, the truck kept closing in, chasing me down that dark highway like it was hunting me. I weaved between lanes trying to shake it, but the truck wouldn't let up. It was as if the driver knew every move I was going to make. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the truck pulled ahead, its taillights fading into the distance. Relieved but shaking, I decided to take the next exit. I had no idea where I was, but I didn't care. I just needed to be anywhere but that highway. I pulled into a small gas station, shaking as I stepped out of my car, thinking it was over. But here's the thing, I wasn't alone. As I got out to stretch my legs, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows, just outside the dim light of the gas station's neon sign. My heart stopped. At first, I thought it was another traveler, maybe a local, but as I squinted into the darkness, I saw something horrifying. It was the same figure I'd seen in the truck, the same still unmoving figure. But how? I had sped away. There's no way they could have followed me here. My mind raced for an explanation, but nothing made sense. I froze, unable to move, watching as the figure slowly stepped forward, revealing a face. No, not a face. There was nothing there. Just a blank, featureless shape. It felt like time stopped. My blood ran cold. I bolted back into my car, locked the doors, and sped away from that gas station as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached my hotel hours later, heart pounding, my mind racing. Even now, I don't know what I saw that night, or how that figure could have been there. But I do know one thing. I'll never take that highway again. And every time I see an 18-wheeler on the road, I wonder, is it watching me? I wish I could say this was the first time it happened, but it wasn't. That's how I always begin this story when people ask about the worst moment in my career. It was a few years back when I was 23, working as a receiver at a steel pipe processing plant. To anyone unfamiliar, that means I operated this massive forklift, one that lifted and moved 40-foot-long steel pipes off of trucks that came into the yard. It was a demanding job, but one I liked. Now, being a woman in an almost entirely male-dominated industry, I was used to getting certain comments. A lot of guys would say, "You look too young to be driving that machine," or ask me out for coffee. Most of the time, I brushed it off, telling them I was married, which worked for the majority of them. But there was this one driver, this one guy, who crossed all kinds of lines. And that's the story I wanted to tell you. The first time I met him, it was just a normal day. I'd seen dozens of truckers pass through, and I had to collect their BOL, bill of lading, which is just a fancy term for the shipping paperwork. The first thing this guy asked when he got out of his truck wasn't about work or the load. It was, "How old are you?" I tried to be polite, like I always did. 23, I said, giving him a half smile. Then he hit me with another one. "Are you married?" My gut feeling told me something was off with this guy. "Engaged," I said quickly, hoping that would end the small talk. But it didn't. He handed me the paperwork, but not without throwing in, "Anything for you, sexy girl." I froze for a second, caught off guard. Did he really just say that? "Excuse me?" I asked, my tone sharpening, hoping he'd realize how inappropriate that was. But instead of backtracking, he leaned into it. "It's really sexy to see a girl like you driving a big truck." Now, I'm not someone who backs down easily. I'm a hothead when I need to be, and this was one of those times. I snatched the paperwork from his hand, trying not to show how pissed off I was. "Listen," I said, "I'm here for a paycheck, not a date. Don't call me sexy or anything you wouldn't say to one of my male coworkers. Got it?" And that's when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I bet your name is bitch." I was stunned. Part of me wanted to yell. Part of me just wanted him gone. I signed his paperwork, dropped his copy into the mud, and made him wait. I offloaded 2 other trucks before I even touched his load. When I finally did, I honked my horn and yelled at him to get back in his truck, laying on the attitude thick. Afterwards, I told my supervisor what had happened. He'd seen me deal with this sort of thing before and always had my back. This time was no different. He told me to let him know if the guy showed up again, and he'd send someone else to handle the paperwork. But guess what? The very next day, the same driver rolled back into the yard. I radioed in, "My favorite driver is back. Can someone come grab his paperwork?" I wasn't about to deal with that creep again. One of my co-workers went to get the BO while I stayed off to the side, having a smoke, trying to stay out of sight. But then my co-worker came back and said, "Don't look, but I think he's taking pictures of you." My heart raced. I turned around and sure enough, there he was, phone in hand, aimed right at me. I ran back to my machine and called it in. "The guy's taking pictures of me," I said over the radio. "I'm not offloading his truck." Security was there in no time. They checked his phone, but he must have deleted the pictures because there was nothing to find. Still, they banned him from the property. I figured that was the end of it. A few weeks later though, I learned from one of the other drivers that this guy had been fired. Apparently, the women in his company's office had been getting weird vibes from him for a while. Then his background check came in. It turns out he had prior sexual assault charges. I can't say I was surprised, but it still sent chills down my spine. That was the last time I saw him, but to this day, I think about how things could have gone differently if I hadn't stood up for myself that first time. In industries like this, being a woman sometimes feels like walking a tightrope, balancing between professionalism and the need to defend yourself from people who just don't respect boundaries. I'm new here, but I've been listening to these stories for about a year now, and it's about time I share one of my own. I was a 19-year-old new mom when this unsettling experience happened. It was after 1 a.m. when my husband, who is now my ex, came home from work with my 17-year-old brother. They wanted to go out for a late-night snack, and since I hadn't left the house in months, I jumped at the chance to get out. I quickly grabbed my baby and placed him in his car seat, in the back passenger seat. I called shotgun, and my husband drove, while my brother squeezed in beside the baby. We lived in a small town, and nothing is open this late within town limits, so our only option was a nearby truck stop, gas station Hardee's, a few miles out of town. The building was small, but the lot was huge, lined with 18-wheeler S on one side and a few cars parked in front. There were some street lamps scattered around, but the lot was mostly dark. We parked in a shadowy spot on the side of the building closest to the entrance. My baby had fallen asleep, so I told my brother and husband to go ahead and order for me. They went in, and I immediately locked the doors, something my mother had drilled into me since childhood. I'm so thankful for that instinct now. About 5 minutes had passed when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a man in his mid-30s with the curly brown hair peeking out from under a red baseball cap, walking in my direction. I figured he was headed toward the restaurant entrance, just a short distance away, and went back to zoning out. A couple of minutes later, I heard a car door handle jiggle. I whipped my head around and saw him tugging at the rear door. The door where my baby was. Panic surged through me. I double and triple checked that all the doors were locked. They were. He quickly walked to my side of the car, trying the handle. I was frozen in fear, adrenaline coursing through me. He moved to the other side, trying those doors too. I was in a state of shock, watching him circle the car multiple times, checking each handle without ever looking directly at me. I pressed my hand on the horn, ready to lay into it if he pulled a weapon or tried anything. I glanced toward the store, trying to catch a glimpse of my brother and husband through the obscured windows, but I couldn't see them. I turned back to look at the man. He was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, but my guard was still up. Finally, my brother and husband exited the restaurant, food in hand. Relief washed over me as I unlocked the doors for them. My brother, however, had a confused look on his face. "What was that guy doing crouched behind the car?" he asked. My heart raced. "He's still there?" I turned to look again, but my brother pointed to one of the cars in front of the building. No. When we walked to the car, he jumped up and ran to that car over there. He's lying flat in the back seat. To this day, I still don't know what that man's intentions were, whether he was after me, the baby, or the car. Whatever it was, I'm just grateful that I didn't find out, and I can only hope he never got the chance to hurt anyone. You know, life takes some pretty strange turns sometimes, and I've got a story that'll give you a glimpse into my world. I begrudgingly earned my living repossessing bank collateral, specifically motor vehicles. As you can probably guess, most people aren't exactly thrilled to see me show up at their door. Let me give you a little background. I don't fit the mold of your typical repo man. Most of my colleagues tower over 6'3" and weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. They usually sport bald heads and bushy beards. Me? I'm just 5'11" and weigh about 155 pounds. But yes, I do have a beard. So one day, I was working in a large mall area, checking for a vehicle I'd been tracking. While I was sitting in my truck, I noticed a red Ford Focus behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it as it made a few turns mirroring mine. But after the 7th or 8th turn, I figured it was time to pull into a parking spot. Maybe the driver would either lose interest or approach me directly. As I parked, I caught a glimpse of the guy in the Focus on his phone, pointing in my direction. Curious, I decided to see what was going on. When I approached, he suddenly got out of his car, which was alarming. I backed off a bit and called out, "Sir, is there a reason you're following me?" He pulled his phone from his ear, covering the mic, and yelled, "Yes, you're harassing people on private property. The cops are on their way." I replied calmly that I'd be happy to wait for the police. He continued to yell incoherently, and I rolled my window up, settling in to wait. A few minutes later, a cruiser arrived and the officer approached my window. I explained the situation, and he confirmed that I was allowed on private property unless told otherwise by the owner or security. After a brief chat, the police left, and I figured I'd move on. About 20 minutes later, I glanced in my rear view mirror and, lo and behold, the same focus was tailing me again. Frustrated, I parked once more and got out for a cigarette. Suddenly, the guy pulled up beside me, yelling about my harassment. I calmly explained that I had already cleared everything with the police and suggested he leave before I called them again. That's when his car rolled away, crashing into a light pole. He flipped out, claiming I'd wrecked his vehicle. I assured him I had dash cam footage to prove otherwise, and that's when he charged at me. Now, I may not be the biggest guy around, but I've handled my fair share of confrontations on the job. As he lunged at me, I sidestepped and managed to take him to the ground, instructing him to stay down while I walked away. I got in my truck and drove off, thinking I should have reported the incident to the police again. Fast forward to 2 nights later. I had just gotten married to my amazing wife, and we were living in a cozy little 1-bedroom apartment in a trendy suburb of a major Midwest city. It was a Friday night, and I decided to grab some beers for us. As I left the store, I noticed a maroon Ford Focus parked nearby, seemingly unoccupied. The coincidence made me uneasy, but I pushed it aside. When I got back to my apartment, the Focus followed me in. I hadn't noticed until I parked. Living on the 3rd floor, I thought I could hustle up the stairs without being seen. Bad move. I was so oblivious that I didn't realize he'd trailed me right to my patio. As I stepped outside, I felt a chill. Suddenly, a voice came from behind a small fence. "Pretty girl." I spun around and there he was, my stalker. Panic surged through me and I yelled for my wife to get inside, lock the door, and call the police. When I confronted him, he pulled out a small switchblade and pointed it at me. My heart raced as I backed up, hands raised, trying to defuse the situation. "We don't have to do this. What do you want?" I asked. His demand? To call my wife outside. There was no way I was exposing her to this lunatic. I stood my ground, and when he lunged at me, the knife grazed my side as I tried to redirect his arm. We crashed to the ground, and he lost his weapon. I managed to get a few knees to his head when police lights flashed nearby. Before long, the officers had him in cuffs. I provided them with the badge number of the officer from my earlier encounter to corroborate everything. I pressed charges, and last I heard, he was awaiting a court date. That night was a stark reminder that life can take some terrifying turns, and sometimes it feels like I'm living in a thriller movie. But I'm grateful for my wife's safety and the quick response of the police. After living in Vancouver, BC, from 1984 to 2001, I decided to move back home. My mom was getting older, and the reasons I left didn't matter anymore. At the time, I was a single mom with a preteen child. I settled in a small town outside the capital region and began working in a daycare. I loved my job, but after getting double pneumonia, I had to find different work. So I went back to school and worked as a nanny for a year. Eventually, I enrolled in a customer service and call center course, leading to a job selling the history of Christianity. By the time I left, they had published book 6 of a 12-book series. Finally, I landed my dream job at Lewis Craft. I started part-time, but I quickly filled in for other shifts. At Lewis Craft, employees needed to knit or crochet and know the products well. I often forgot I was wearing my name tag, which was cross-stitched in turquoise, on a white background, making my name easy to see. I got settled into my new job and supplemented my income with another part-time job that paid better. It was also around this time that I met my future husband. I realized I had to deal with my alcohol consumption, so I began attending meetings after work. One late summer evening, after a meeting, I was waiting for the bus home. I could have walked, but I was tired. My boyfriend offered to pick me up, but I declined. Little did I know I would soon regret that decision. As I sat at the bus stop, listening to music on my Discman, an old truck pulled up in front of me. The window rolled down and a man said, "Hey, crafty gal, do you want to party? I can hook you up with some good stuff." I didn't even realize he used my name, which is unique. I replied, "No thanks, but I'm not interested." "Come on, it will be fun," he insisted. "What part of no don't you understand?" I shot back. I felt relieved when I saw the bus approaching, but then the man did something strange. He backed his truck into a dead-end lane next to a Catholic church and watched me as I got on the bus. I pulled out my phone and called my boyfriend, asking him to meet me at the nearby 7-Eleven. I told him not to bring the truck. Walking would be faster. My creep radar was on high alert. The bus driver noticed my anxiety and asked if everything was okay. I explained that I felt like I was being followed. He dropped me off at a red light so I could cross the road safely. When my boyfriend arrived, he usually didn't show public affection because of his Asperger's, but he understood I needed support. I exaggerated my hug to signal something was wrong. Thankfully, the strange truck drove off quickly. As winter set in, I stopped my evening walks and bus rides, putting the encounter out of my mind. That changed one spring day when I saw a photo of Thomas Sveckler on the front page of a newspaper. My heart sank. It was the man from the truck. He had been found guilty in one death and acquitted in another. He was linked to several murders and disappearances. Now, he was sentenced as a dangerous offender, meaning he would never get out of prison. In that moment, I felt relief knowing I had escaped a potentially dangerous situation. It was a reminder of how quickly things can escalate and the importance of trusting your instincts. I was living with my parents during the lockdown, and one night, I wanted to smoke some weed before heading to bed. I figured it was nearly midnight, and with everyone inside, the streets would be empty. I didn't want to stink up the house, so I thought, why not just take a little walk? About 5 minutes after I left, I spotted a black pickup truck driving past me. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, it's not unusual to see cars around, right? But then, when I reached the end of the street, I saw the same truck driving back towards me. I thought maybe the driver had forgotten something and was just turning around. I kept walking, and guess what? I saw that truck drive past me again. That's when I started to feel a little paranoid. I mean, 3 times. I was already listening to a true crime podcast while smoking, which was probably not the best combo for keeping my nerves in check. I know my neighborhood well, and I usually feel safe, but this was pushing it. Trying to shake off the feeling, I changed my route, thinking maybe I was just being overly cautious. But then, wouldn't you know it, I saw the black pickup again. At this point, I was freaking out. It felt like he was following me, and that thought made my heart race. So I did something probably really stupid. I stopped and stared him down as he drove towards me. I thought, I can't show fear. I need to look ready to defend myself. But here's the weird part. He didn't even look at me. He just kept driving like I was invisible. That really threw me off. How could he not notice he was passing me for the fourth time? The road and my path were so close, and there was no one else around. It was bizarre. Feeling super uneasy, I ducked into a nearby alleyway that a stranger wouldn't know about. I called my friend, saying, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but there's this black truck that keeps circling the neighborhood." He was concerned and said he'd go check it out. While we were on the phone, he started looking down his street. Then I heard him go quiet. "Holy crap, that's him. I'm going inside," he exclaimed. I was still hiding in that alley, and my friend was watching the truck with his cameras. To my shock, that same truck drove past his house 2 more times in just a few minutes. We both agreed this was really strange, so I called the non-emergency police number to report it. They said they'd send someone to check it out. Meanwhile, I called my dad to come pick me up. Thankfully, he didn't care that I was smoking. He was just a great dad and came right away. When I got home and called my friend for updates, he told me the truck had passed his house 15 times while I was gone, about a 20-minute window. After the 15th pass, he finally saw a police van driving down the street, and just like that, the black truck was gone. I tried to rationalize the whole thing afterward. Maybe he was a pizza delivery guy, but that didn't make sense. He wasn't stopping to look at the houses. Maybe he was looking for a lost pet, but the area was too small for that. Honestly, I'm still left wondering what that driver was doing. It was one of the weirdest experiences of my life, and I'm just glad I got home safe. Okay, so this happened to me last night. It was around 11:30 p.m. and I was on this highway that was under construction. It was a 1-lane road with concrete walls on either side of me. There was a truck in front of me, blocking my view, and we were cruising at about 70 miles per hour. I noticed there weren't any cars behind me. Suddenly, the truck in front of me slammed on his brakes. I stopped too, thinking maybe another vehicle had stopped in front of him. We continued on, but then we stopped again. I didn't think much of it at first, since I couldn't see past him. Eventually, the road widened into 2 lanes with a shoulder. I pulled into the shoulder to see what was going on, and to my surprise, there was nobody in front of the truck. I got back into my lane, but then he stopped again, which felt really strange. A few minutes went by and I noticed him weaving between the 2 lanes. Every time he stopped, I stopped. That's when I decided to grab my phone and dial 911, but I didn't hit the call button because he started moving again. Now, I drive a Volvo V70R, which I love. Whenever I'm in situations like this, stop and go traffic, I usually keep one hand on the wheel and the other on the gear shifter, manually shifting. So, I set my phone down and accelerated back up to 70. But then, he slammed on his brakes again, and my phone flew across the car. It ended up somewhere in the floorboards. We went through the start-stop routine again. He'd start, I'd start, and then he'd stop, getting up to about 50 miles per hour before slamming to a halt again. At this point, I started getting really scared. I was thinking, if there's a car behind me, I could end up going right underneath this truck. The thought was terrifying. You might wonder why I didn't just pass him. Trust me, I tried multiple times, but every time I would go to pass, he'd accelerate and block my lane. So, after another start-stop cycle, I gathered my courage to finally pass him. I got halfway past his truck, about 3/4 of the trailer, when he suddenly jerked to the right. Not slowly, but quickly. I hit the brakes hard, knowing I had to avoid hitting him or slamming into the concrete wall. I was just an inch away from taking out my left side mirror. It was that close. His back tires barely missed me, just a couple of inches away. I was incredibly relieved I hadn't gone any faster or gotten any closer to the cab. I genuinely believe his intention was to cause me harm. A minute later, the road split into 3 lanes, and I finally passed him. That whole experience was beyond terrifying, and I'm just grateful I made it out of there safely.